Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. On today's episode, my conversation with Dr. Sona Vasudevan. Sona is the head of the Systems Medicine program at Georgetown University School of Medicine. She also founded the program, and she's a researcher, professor, mother, daughter, sister, and so many other things. She's also a close friend and a mentor. I first met Dr. Vasudevan when I, luckily, landed in her class at Georgetown, studying the human microbiome and the role that it plays in health and disease. This class totally blew my mind. I felt so fortunate to have ended up in graduate school at the exact time and place that it was possible for a person studying health policy to also study the role of the microbiome in health and disease. Dr. Vasudevan has a long and illustrious background in science and research. She also has an interactive history with natural health practices, and she personally studies and practices things like meditation and yoga. In this conversation, we discuss what is systems medicine and the role that it plays in individual health as well as public health applications. We also talk about how to use science to study things like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine and other practices that are often considered more traditional or holistic. We cover so many topics in this conversation, and I am truly thrilled to bring you my conversation with Dr. Sona Vasudevan. Sona, Dr. Vasudevan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you for having me.
It is beyond my pleasure.
It's my honor to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. So I want to start because this is a personal fascination of mine, sort of understanding where people thought they were going in life and then where they ended up. I want to start way back in the way back, baby Sona, maybe in high school, looking towards the future. What did you think you wanted to study as a young person, and what did you picture yourself becoming when you grew up?
Yes. So I grew up in a household of all sciencey people. So I was always fascinated by sciences. And I believe it was my sixth grade biology teacher who actually inspired me. And I have an uncle, paternal uncle, who was a physicist. So he was my role model at that point in time. So right in sixth or seventh grade, I decided I was just going to follow his footsteps. And all I did was just follow his footsteps. Majored in physics. He was a physicist. I majored in physics. Did my undergraduate degree in physics. Did my master's degree in biophysics. He was an X-ray crystallographer. And he was one of the first students of a renowned biophysicist. And it's a household name for anyone who looks at three-dimensional structures. It's called the Ramachandran plot. My uncle was his first student. So very young, I decided I'll follow his footsteps. So I just followed his footsteps, did my PhD in medical biophysics in University of Toronto. And at that point in time, my goal was to just run a lab, continue to do science, continue to do structural biology, and I didn't have any other plans. So I just pursued that plan. Did my postdoctoral training at Scripps Research Institute. Still continued structural biology. Then I got a golden opportunity to work with Tom Check in Boulder. So moved to Boulder and got exposed to the whole world of RNA. All along at this point in time, all my goal was to run a lab, just continue to do sciences. And then there was a turning point in my life. I got married to the best man of my life right now. That changed the whole trajectory of completely all my plans. So I had to move to the area, Virginia. And I just didn't know what I was going to do. So I just got an opportunity to work at the NIH. And that, again, changed my trajectory and career path. Had my child. And so, again, that changed my trajectory. But then I got an opportunity to move to Georgetown. And I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Still continued research, but my whole plan of becoming and running a lab was shattered at that moment in time. And then my chairman, I vividly remember, called me into his office and said, can I ask you for a favor? And I said, what is it? I want you to teach a structural biology course. And I've never done teaching until that point in time. And I like challenges. I said, sure. I took on the responsibility of launching a course in structural biology. That is when that opened my heart that I loved teaching and I loved being around students. And suddenly it dawned on me that the entire life that I had set forth to run a lab and all of that was probably not for me. And just said, moved into education. That's where I am today as an educator.
That's amazing. And of course, that's where I met you, in the classroom. So I'm very grateful for that pivot. Very quickly, if it's possible to do this quickly, because this podcast is for a general audience, could you give us a brief overview of what structural biology means?
Sure. So we have hundreds and thousands of proteins inside our body. And the way we typically look at them is string of amino acids connected together, or if you talk about DNA, string of nucleotides connected together. But that's not how it is. That's not how it exists. Every protein or DNA, RNA folds into three dimensions, and that's what gives it its function. So structures are the life of the cell. So every protein or DNA, RNA fold into three dimensions, and that's what gives them the function.
That is so interesting. And when you went to Boulder and learned about RNA, of course, right now in society, I think mRNA is a term that we're all used to hearing. But can you again just give a brief overview of what RNA really is and what it's up to in the body?
Yeah. So I'm just going to go back to defining the central dogma of molecular biology, where we have the DNA, and then through the process of replication, the DNA replicates. And then we have what is called the transcription. From the DNA, it gets transcribed to what is called the messenger RNA. mRNA is for messenger RNA. It carries all the message that one needs that makes the proteins. So from the messenger RNA, it gets translated into proteins, which is what does most of the bodily functions. Until a decade ago, people forgot about RNA and its role. But now we think that it's all about RNA, and there are lots of different types of RNA in the cell. We have the microRNAs that control gene expression. We have, of course, tRNA, transfer RNA, that is very important in transcribing and translating from mRNA to proteins. So we have lots of non-coding RNAs that also exist in the cell, which we thought was never existed or never played a role in regulation of cellular gene expression and all of those things. So now RNAs become very central. I'm someone who believes that the whole world evolved from an RNA world, but no one knows how the DNA took over. Having worked for Tom Cech, who won the Nobel Prize for the ribozyme, so I always believe his philosophies and theory that the world existed with all RNA. And so now we are seeing a lot of roles of RNA, and we're uncovering and unraveling all of the important roles RNA plays in the cell.
Wow. Well, I will avoid spending the next 3 hours asking follow-up questions on this topic because it's so interesting to me, but we may have to circle back to that personally at a later date because there is just an unlimited amount of questions that I think I could ask on that topic. So you ended up at Georgetown in 2005, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And you found your love for teaching. I also love that you were initially inspired by your uncle, and I think it's interesting how many twists and turns your path took, and yet your North Star of science and advancing science always remained. So that's beautiful and very inspiring. You end up at Georgetown, and then you get the opportunity to develop a new course, a new curriculum, and that is what eventually became systems medicine. So can you tell me a little bit about that process?
Yes, sure. So when I came to Georgetown, I started as a bioinformatics researcher under the leadership of Kathy Wu. I have to mention her. Without her, I wouldn't have been at Georgetown. and Robert Ledley, who discovered the first CT scanner at Georgetown and who paved the whole field of informatics 50 years before even we knew what informatics was. So my sister was another role model for me in my life. She was a physician scientist, gastroenterologist, trained at Harvard, and she was at Emory School of Medicine. She got diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. And as you know, ovarian cancer creeps up into you and you won't even know that you're actually harboring a tumor and cancer in your body. And when it's diagnosed, it's already advanced stages. And we were all shocked because she was young, relatively young. And but then there was this big hope for us that a renowned institution here in the U.S. Was running a clinical trials for advanced patients with ovarian cancer, such as my sister had, using the dendritic cell therapy. So we were all very excited about that and thought, well, that's her cure, because we heard lots of good things about it. I believe 6 patients were registered for the trial. One of it was my sister. And it's a course of 6 injections, 1 injection per week for 6 weeks. And we're all waiting for the 6th week that we can celebrate that she'll be in recurrence. The first 2 weeks, no incidents, everything went okay. The 3rd week, things did not go well. She had lots of fluid accumulated in her lungs. Eventually, the dice turned against her and she passed before making the 5-year mark. So 4 out of the 6 patients passed away, but 2 patients, as far as I know, are still alive today.
Wow.
So that got me reflecting, why did that happen? She had age on her side, and she was healthy, and we all thought things would work better for her than people older than her. But I couldn't really understand what happened. And time again, I started pondering why did it happen when 2 people are still alive? Why did it happen? So that was the same moment that I was called into my dean's office and my boss gave me the responsibility of launching a new program called systems medicine. I walked away from the room not knowing what systems medicine actually was. But then here I am leading a program in systems medicine. So that was a trigger for me and it became very personal. There are so many people who don't understand that one size fits all is actually a myth. Each of us are different. We are unique in our own ways. And it's just not the genes that define us. There are lots more things that define us. And so I readily undertook the challenge. And, I've been reflecting every year and learning from my own students, such as you, and learning exactly how complex human body is, or is it actually even complex? But what are the differences between 2 individuals?
Right.
So I launched the program. The first one was a pilot program. It's a dual degree program, MD-MS program in systems medicine that was launched specifically for Georgetown's medical students. And I have to mention here the vision of that program was by our then executive vice president, Howard Fedorov. It was his idea. So I must clarify that it was not my idea of launching the whole concept, but I launched the program. But the idea was actually from Howard Fedorov, who had the vision that everyone has to learn that. So here I am after 12 years. I've developed another master's program, which is a freestanding master's program. That is for anyone who is interested in this topic.
Well, hopefully that's everyone, because I really do believe that the future of medicine is personalized and takes into account everything unique about an individual, not just their genetics, as you say, but things like their microbiome, their environment, their diet, their activity, their stressors. All of that is important. But for someone who has no idea what we're talking about, can you give an overview of what you would say, what is systems medicine?
Yes, sure. So if we were to define systems medicine in a very formal way, so it is an interdisciplinary approach that integrates biological, clinical, and computational sciences. And it adopts a holistic perspective, considering the whole human body as a complex system, but as a whole. And it aims to understand diseases more from an underlying mechanistic perspectives, and defines each individual as their own person, and define and come up with treatment plans that is more precisely made, tailored to individual person at the right time, at the right place, and the right moment. So long gone are the days when we all thought that genes are the only ones that play a role. But now we have realized, as you just mentioned, genes are just one part of it. So I call it a disease equation. And it consists of genetics as a genetics, of course, plays a big role. But also we have environmental factors, we have nutrition, food is medicine, what we put through your mouth, and also the microbiome, which I'm really, really fascinated about now. So I think each disease, there are different percentages contribution from each one of these that make up. So it's not just genes, but it's also environment and other factors that play a big role. And the most important concept that came out of all of this is that each of us have our own contributions to this equation, and different aspects play a big role in our underlying functioning of different aspects.
Absolutely. I love how you said a couple of things there. One, that every disease is an equation. I just think that's very beautiful to kind of imagine, and a great way of thinking about and visualizing the way that systems medicine works. It's like body plus environment plus diet plus, multiplied by stress, multiplied by microbiome, raised to the power of lifetime exposures equals each individual disease. And something that always kind of has troubled me about, broadly speaking, the Western medical system is that diagnoses tend to just be a list of symptoms, right? Of course, there are things like cancer where they're going for the presence of certain cells. But oftentimes, if you're diagnosed with ALS, MS, depression, bipolar disorder, a lot of these very big and heavy diagnoses, the diagnosis process is, checking off a list of symptoms. And if you have 5 or more of those symptoms, then you have the disease. But that diagnosis doesn't really ever speak to the actual functionality or root cause or combination of factors that might have led to that disease. So, to what extent do you see systems medicine as being similar or different from just sort of like a more holistic practice of medicine, quote unquote, functional medicine? And how do you see systems medicine playing a role in improving not just the precision of care that we're able to give to patients, but the quality of care and improving long-term outcomes?
So, in a nutshell, I feel that each of these modalities is complementary. And in fact, we can come up with another equation that all of them, everything says the same thing, but we're just using different terminologies. And you rightly pointed out that ALS and cancer and all of these are very complex diseases. So, of course, there are some diseases which are just caused by one gene, so monogenic diseases which are very simple, like sickle cell anemia. There's only one mutation, so that's a different story. But majority of other diseases are complex in nature, in the sense that the complexity arises from the fact that many organs are involved in that particular disease. So I almost want to rename all of these diseases, because I think the naming of these diseases is very, very confusing. Sometimes it's named after someone who discovered something, or someone it's named after the organ in which it arises. But at the end of the day, for example, type 2 diabetes is a very complex disease in a sense that a lot of different organs are involved. So you have the brain, you have the kidneys, you have the heart that's involved, or eyes, and all of those different organs. So that is where systems comes into the picture. So And now we have a magic bullet and magic drug, metformin, given to, and it works like magic. It does reduce the levels of sugars in your blood. But what we are not understanding is because of the systems, where different systems are involved, just targeting it to one organ and one gene is actually, we are not worrying about what it's causing other dysbiosis and other things. I'm just using the name dysbiosis in a
Right.
loose term here. So there are lots of other complications which we are not looking at. And I think the way we are practicing medicine right now is more treating the symptoms and not necessarily going through the underlying mechanism of what is causing those systems, as you actually mentioned earlier. And so that's how systems medicine is, where you're going to look at the whole body and whole different organ systems it's affecting, what is the path of it and all of those things. But how does functional medicine come into the picture? I'm really fascinated by the whole term that it's called functional medicine, because it not only just is about putting a medicine through your mouth to target different things and different conditions, but also it takes into account the underlying biochemical things of things. For example, if someone is put on statins, for example, to decrease their cholesterol, but no one is aware that coenzyme Q is actually needed to compensate for the ill effects of the statin that's going to cause, right? So the functional medicine, and I think the functional medicine also, I think their blood work is very different from what traditional Western medicine offices do. They look at the metabolic panels and profiles that rarely we actually take into account. So in a nutshell, all of them have to merge together. And again, it's more holistic approach to medicine. But actually, we are not looking into, when we go to the doctor's office, they're not asking you about your nutrition, your mental state, and stressors and other things that are actually need to be considered. So in a sense, systems medicine approach of looking at the system as a whole is what functional medicine is all about, but it's just different aspects of the same thing.
Yeah. I also like hearing you talk about systems medicine. I'm like, can we call it detective medicine, right? Because you're sort of solving a puzzle. You're looking at someone who maybe has type 2 diabetes and you're going, okay, when did it start? And is there a history of it in your family? Do you have a genetic predisposition? Was there a trauma that occurred right before the onset of this disease? What are you eating? What are you drinking? How are you sleeping? What's your day-to-day life like? Do you exercise? What symptoms were you experiencing, right? Because one person who ends up being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes maybe was having headaches or blurred vision, and another might have felt fine but was just peeing a lot, right? It can be all over the map. So just understanding, like zooming out and then zooming in and taking a magnifying glass and going, I'm going to track down where this started, how it manifested, and what continues to propagate this disease in the body. It's just so much more complete and to me, so much more interesting and, dare I say, fun, actually, than just looking and saying, oh, there's a symptom, here's a drug, go home, treat it, don't worry about it, don't change anything else. And I think for me personally, and hopefully any listener knows a lot about my history with getting curious about health issues and how that's led me to everything I do now and everything I care about. But when I hear systems medicine being described, I'm hearing curiosity. And I'm hearing really what, if you talk to the average person in America about what's wrong with healthcare, how do you find it disappointing when you go to the doctor? You always hear people say, they didn't ask me enough questions about myself. They didn't take enough time to understand my history. No one seemed to be tailoring anything specifically to me. They just got a list of my symptoms, handed me a script, and sent me out the door. And so it sounds like systems medicine is really solving a lot of those issues that we see in the medical system right now by tailoring it to the individual and dialing it down to the individual. However, this is my own personal kind of slant on it and bias because I constantly am thinking about public health. I think a lot of people hear about this type of medicine, certainly things like holistic medicine, functional medicine, and systems medicine. And they think, oh, it's so personalized that it's going to be too expensive and it can never be compatible with a functioning public health approach. And I actually think that that's totally untrue and actually the opposite of what's true. And I think a public health lens is actually a systems-oriented lens because a true public health person analyzing a health system would say, how are all of these systems functioning? Is there clean water? Is there clean air? Are there supportive primary care physicians? Does the patient have access to open spaces to exercise? Do they feel safe in their home? Can they afford healthy food? So the public health view of health is actually very systems oriented, and systems medicine is almost like a public health approach zoomed into an individual. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people think that systems medicine and public health are at odds with each other. In fact, that they're competing with each other. But there are of course some nuances to all of this. For example, of course, both either it's public health or systems medicine. The goal of both is the same, that you're trying to improve healthcare and health of a person. So I think when you look at public health, people always think that we're talking about more a population. So for example, COVID, right? So we found a vaccine, mRNA vaccine, that's given to the entire population. So you're taking care of entire population. But how are we going to practice systems medicine in this scenario where the vaccine works and some person does not? So how are we? I think that's where the people think that they don't align with each other. And the other reason that they think it doesn't is I think the public health, at least from my perspective, they think that systems medicine probably will cost more just because it is individualized care. How are we going to manage that? Which means it's going to take away all the resources from the public health stages and all of those things. And also the disparity gaps, right? So how are people, not everyone can afford to do personalized treatments because of insurance issues and all of the other problems that come along. So I think that is why people think that systems medicine and public health are at odds with each other and the goals don't seem to match. But I think they do match because at the end of the day, we are looking at systems. And as you correctly and beautifully said, that it is a whole system that has to be in place to be able to deliver even the vaccines. It's a whole system in place to deliver all of that. So my take on this is it's not that if we have a population of 1 million people, we can stratify this 1 million people into groups of people that are similar to each other. Mm-hmm. So I am not referring to ethnicity here because to me, ethnicity is a big thing, but I think that me living in the US, I am different from an Indian in India. So which means I'm Indian doesn't mean that I am going to have all the same reactions that a person in India does. I'm here and my environment has changed. So I'm Indian by birth, but at the same time, my genetics is the root goes back to India. But at the same time, I'm living here. The environment is different and all of those things. So I'm talking about stratifying population based on similarities. And we can stratify, for example, by nutrition, by environmental exposures, mm-hmm. By, what is available to and all of those things. So I think at that point in time, public health is going to merge with systems medicine or systems medicine is going to merge with us. Because at the end of the day, that is the goal. The goal is to take care of every person. But we're going to group them and stratify them. But how do we stratify them? In the current situation, it's not going to be easy. The way we are collecting data from patients, we don't have enough data to actually stratify patients. We are not collecting the right set of data. What is the nutrition? What do you eat? What is your mental health? What are the things, what kind of exercise do you do to calm you down? What helps you? Do you listen to music to calm you down? Which is something that I do all the time. So those are not factors that a physician right now is taking. It's not a holistic way that they are looking at a patient. They don't know anything about the patient. They are like, okay, I have a headache. Okay, take Tylenol. I have the flu. Okay, I'm giving you Tamiflu. Other than that, the doctors don't have the time even to get to know their patients.
Right.
So I think that has to change. And so to me, they're one and the same. It's just that we're looking at different things. But the goal is the same.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that the topic of, single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all, very controversial, and I personally have views sort of on both sides of the conversation. But through a public health and systems medicine lens, I think that the best argument for a single payer system is data collection.
That's right.
Because you can anonymize the data, you can strip it of, personal identifiers, but gathering that data and going, okay, I can now look at the state of Maryland and see how many people are overweight or obese, how many people have allergies, asthma, cancer, and I can look at that over a 10-year period. I can look for trends. I can compare that to records of food sales. I can compare that to air pollution records. Being able to have that data to look at it, to again, take a systems medicine approach to just a larger organism, right? A state as opposed to a human. Each is an organism and like a universe unto itself, right? So systems medicine is looking at, Marian and her universe inside of her and all the systems that are influencing anything that's happening to me. But similarly, if the state of Maryland goes, wow, like our Medicare expenditures the last 5 years have skyrocketed. And even though we had great vaccine delivery, we still had tons of hospitalizations from COVID. Let's pull up the records and look at our system. Oh, we see that even though we had great vaccine delivery, we have 5% of people over age 50 in Maryland are taking immune suppressing drugs for chronic illnesses. That might be impacting their immunogenicity in response to the vaccine. Maybe we should be doing more follow-up care and actually pulling titers on everyone who gets the vaccine to see how it's working. Maybe certain populations need a 5th dose or a 6th dose. Maybe others only need 2, right? Being able to take that systems approach at a population level would be so much easier if we had the data. And so I think to kind of reflect what you just said, public health and systems medicine or personalized medicine are actually complementary. And I think if we were able to see an investment in personalized medicine as an investment in public health. So, okay, for the next 10 years, we're going to just collect so much data on all these personalized approaches. We could actually build out a system that does have these stratified populations who are more similar than different. I do want to also point to what you said about ethnic groups not really being a good way to group people. I'm reading this great book by Dr. Ian Miles right now, incredible doctor, public health professional, researcher and at the NIH, also guest lecturer at Georgetown. And he goes on and on about how people are just desperate to use genetics and ethnic grouping to group people. But actually, there's more genetic difference within ethnic groups than without. So it's a terrible way to group people. And we should be much more focused on things like age and environmental exposures and even diagnostic clusters, right? A group of people who all have asthma are a much more interesting group than whatever, an Indian population that's going to be wildly diverse. So it is so important to consider how we all have ethnic backgrounds, quote unquote, but I dare someone to tell me what my ethnicity is. I really do. If you trace me back, it's one branch goes to England and one branch goes to Ireland and one branch goes to Germany and one branch goes to Russia. And I don't know, what does that make me? You really couldn't group me in that way. But if you were to take some biometric data from me, then you could go, oh, she's someone who has this expression of this gene. We'll put her in that stratified group and understand her that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to add one thing. I think we are all our own proponents. I mean, we are all our own doctors. We are all our own. So I think every single person has to be in tune with their own self and figure things. And we can actually solve a lot of problems even without going to the doctor's office. For example, one example is my daughter. Of course, she's a freshman in college right now. But she's had lots of issues with food and all of those things. But at one point, her thyroid levels were off. And then the doctors were like, well, we have to put her on medication. I'm not someone who just puts a medication through my, down the throat without investigating it further, just because I think systems. But then what she did was she corrected it completely on her own. She just said, well, I think gluten doesn't work with me. And she completely eliminated gluten out of her diet. And we're talking when she was like 12, 13 years old, for someone to actually be in tune with their own self and said, okay, I'm going to remove gluten. And today her blood work is perfect. So little things like that. And also, I don't have any genetic predispositions to any major, lipid profile issues or anything like that. But my cholesterol levels have always been high for more than 20, 25 years. I didn't understand why, because it's not coming from my diet. And then I said, well, it's probably genetic predisposition, and let go of that. Until the day I was teaching in class, I was teaching biochemistry, and on the screen, literally, I just froze. I looked at vitamin D and cholesterol pathways, and all of them connected to each other. I'm like, wait, I should probably go look at my vitamin D levels. And I went to the doctor. I said, I need vitamin D levels checked. He said, well, the insurance is not going to cover that. I said, that's okay. I just want to test something on myself. And that's when I found my vitamin D levels were very low. And it is actually counterintuitive, because all Indians, we think we're on the sun, we get lots of sun, but we have a polymorphism that does not convert the vitamin D hydroxy from the sun to you. So we are all deficient. And I got put on vitamin D treatment, and I measured my cholesterol. It was back to normal. So I'm not advocating that, if you have cholesterol issues, just take vitamin D. I'm not advocating that for the record. But in my particular case, that was. So it was all in tune with your own knowledge. And you don't want to put anything through your mouth without understanding what that medication is going to do.
Yes.
And I'm just going to connect structural biology here. When you take a drug, you think that the drug is developed for a specific target in your body, and it's going to just go there and it's just going to do what it's supposed to, but that's not the case. Each and every drug works and binds to 10,000 other proteins in your body, because at the end of the day, all of your proteins are folded into 3 dimensions. And for example, all kinases, for which most of the drugs are developed today for cancers and other things, are all look alike. So which means the drug doesn't know exactly where to go. So it does bind to different things. When it binds to different things, then it's going to cause different side reactions. And even, for example, statins, right? So when you take statins, it's beautiful. It's a magic bullet. It does decrease your bad cholesterol, so to speak, the LDL, I'm sorry. But 1 in 50 patients who are put on statins end up getting type 2 diabetes. And the reason is because of the mechanistic. So we are not focusing on the mechanism, because one thing, everything is connected in system. So one thing you think it's affecting, but it's going to affect something else. So instead of just having high cholesterol, now you have to deal with 2 diseases, which is type 2 diabetes. Eventually, you're going to get the third one, which is hypertension. So I think that's where we are not, medicine is not precise at this moment in time.
Yeah. What that brought up for me, this is something that I've said a million times to people, but it's not very scientific, but I think it applies to me in the way that we talk about disease in our culture, again, very symptom focused, and we treat the symptom as the problem. But the symptom is a clue about a system that is struggling. Mm-hmm. So I always say, when our body shows us a symptom, we have a choice. We can either believe it and listen and try to figure out what is leading to that symptom, or we can tell it it's stupid and bad and wrong and silence it with a pill or a drug. Now, of course, there are some drugs that are actually treating the system. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are some symptoms like late-stage cancer that aren't just like a clue you want to listen to and allow it to continue. But my example is, I'll bring it back to my own teenage daughter. She had been gluten-free her whole life because when she was a baby, she had eczema. I took gluten out of her diet. She was magically healed, so we were gluten-free. Then, of course, she becomes a teenager. She's curious about the world. I've told her she's sensitive to gluten. She's like, well, let me figure it out. So she starts on the sly eating pita chips and bread and stuff and not telling me. And for a while, she feels okay. She doesn't notice any immediate symptoms. And then everything went crazy. It took a few weeks, but her body went totally bananas. And I won't list all the ways that it manifested, but one of the most horrific ways, especially for a teenage girl, is that she suddenly had crazy acne all over her face. And she had always had perfect skin. And I was like, what's going on with your face, Finally, she came to me and confessed. She's like, I ate gluten. I've been eating gluten for weeks. I'm so sorry. I thought it wasn't bothering me. I thought maybe you were crazy. But now, obviously, I messed up What can I do? And for a minute, she was like begging me to just take her to a dermatologist. She's like, all my friends go to dermatologists. They're all taking all these drugs. They all cover their skin in these potions and lotions. Why can't I do that too? And I was like, you could do that, but you're not suffering from an acne medication deficiency. We know that you disrupted a system in your body, and your body is telling you about it by showing up on your face. So why would we squash and silence that symptom when we actually know how to get back to the root and treat it? Sure enough, she went back to being gluten-free. I changed her probiotic routine. We added a couple supplements. And within about a month, her skin was healed and continued to heal and return to its normal state. So many people would not even have any idea how to approach that. But luckily, we had this history of understanding the role that diet could play in manifesting or reversing symptoms. But for so many people, if they're dealing with acne or eczema, any kind of a skin symptom, they think, this is just an annoying symptom that I want to shut down and suppress. But what I always wonder, and I'm curious if you can speak to this, when we silence a symptom, as you say, all these systems are connected. So where does the symptom go, right? Like if I am having an eczema rash on my arm and a doctor gives me a corticosteroid cream and I cover the rash with that cream and I suppress that symptom, well, all those inflammatory signals, all of that information that was trying to express itself on the surface of the skin, it's now been turned off or sent back within, but it hasn't been treated. It hasn't been cured. So where does the symptom go?
Yeah. So there are different ways to look at it. Of course, this is a simplistic. Some of the things that you're treating is localized, right? And as you know, we have trillion cells in our body. And each and every cell has the same number of genes and everything except your sex chromosomes and stuff. So depending on which organ, some of these gets expressed and some of them don't get expressed. But that is just, basic knowledge. But you ask a very interesting question. So there is one that is localized, which means you're treating the skin and it's responsive and it's gone. But then the other side of it is it may be manifesting in some other way, not necessarily eczema in some place, but it may be manifesting as an inflammation in something. So within few days, you may get a cold, which you're not going to be connecting with your eczema. I'm just giving this as an example. Mm-hmm. And so you may get a cold or you may get a headache or you may get something else which you are not going to connect with your eczema. But then everything is connected to each other. So and we always think that one gene, one protein has only one function in the body. Mm-hmm. But it does not. So each protein, and it's like a relay system. Everything is connected. If something goes off, everything falls apart, right? So, but then there are also alternative backup mechanisms that come and help. So we don't notice anything. We don't fall apart because you have eczema. That's because there are compensatory mechanisms that come into the play. But sometimes these may erupt again. Maybe you're just silencing it for temporarily, but your eczema is not gone. Right. So same with inflammation. Actually, practically every disease, inflammation is the side effect of the disease is inflammation. But I look at it as a funnel. So we are actually trying to cure the symptom for inflammation, but we are not actually getting to the bottom of the funnel, which is the joining point. That is the root cause of the inflammation. And I always think that if you find a cure for inflammation and it's all it's coming up from the same part of the body, but we think it's manifesting in different parts of the body, but it's actually the root cause is actually somewhere that we have not figured it out.
Right.
And once we figure out and treat the root cause, I guess that is going to be gone. So again, the principles of treating symptoms is not the solution at this point in time, right? So
yeah, I always think it's kind of funny. There's certain words that make their way into common vernacular, and people don't always realize that these words have multiple meanings and that they might be saying opposite things. So just to give my example of what I'm thinking of, people hear the word inflammation and they think bad. Mm-hmm. They hear the word immune response or that phrase and they think good. Mm-hmm. So you'll hear someone say, oh, I really want to reduce inflammation in my body. But that same person might say, I'm taking this, this, and this to boost my immune response. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, Your immune system responds by producing inflammation.
That's right.
So actually, if you're trying to reduce inflammation, you should be trying to calm or at least tone your immune response. But because of the way that pop culture has latched onto these terms, we have this basic understanding that inflammation is bad and a basic understanding that immune system hyper response is good. But in fact, those are the same thing
That's right.
on a lot of levels. And the real answer is somewhere in the middle. We want enough, but not too much. We want a lot of T regulatory cells to come in and help us understand, is this protein really dangerous? Can I learn to live with it? Can we be symbiotic friends and neighbors? Or do I really have to attack it, cover it up, and get it out of the body? And my own experience as a young person, I was very inflamed. When I was 18, 19, 20, I couldn't run because my knees hurt all the time. I didn't realize that I had this constant inflammation. And of course, then the irony again is that if your body is so busy responding to what it perceives as a chronic threat, it can get worse and worse at responding to individual threats. So I was inflamed systemically all the time, which meant that when a cold came my way, for example, I didn't have enough resources to defend myself. So again, very complicated, but I do think it's important to help the average person understand that some of these things that we've labeled as like inherently bad are not. They're just complicated. And we need to sort of, similarly to, and we'll eventually get here, the microbiome, over time, over decades, over a century, we've heard germs are bad. And that's not true. Germs are everything. Germs are just like people. There's good ones, there's bad ones, there's complicated ones, there's ones that have a good time in the morning and a bad time in the evening. They're all over the map. So anyway, because this is like a conversation that I hope is reaching people with varied levels of understanding of health, medicine, public health, I want to make sure that I take time to kind of say, like, some of these things that we've been taught to perceive as bad are actually good in the right context and just bad when there's too much of them or too much of them all the time. Just like stress. A temporary stressor can be really healthy and adaptive, but long-term chronic stress, that's when the problems begin to pop up because all of the mechanisms that your body has evolved to adapt to stress are meant to adapt quickly and then resolve and rest. And when you're pumping cortisol 24/7, that's not going to be long-term beneficial.
I agree with you. And I think that's why we have lots of increase in the number of germ phobias here, because of the perception that you have to, bacteria, oh my God, if something falls down on the floor, oh my God, that's it. And you're going to get, whatever it is. Of course, there are some bacteria that are going to cause pathogens that are going to cause. But the whole concept of too much of cleaning is actually not good is actually true, because then your body is not exposed to, things that it needs to be exposed to. And in fact, we have Dr. Chutkan that you probably met. She's a gastroenterologist, amazing person with so much of knowledge about the microbiome. She always ends her class by saying, "Don't shower for the next week because you have to go and play dirty and be dirty for some time," kind of thing. So what what she says is true. Even in India, right? So it's not there's no way to be super clean. And I always feel the food tastes better there than here because the vegetables are all dirty sometimes. So I always joke that food tastes better there. And also that is good for your immune system too, because it doesn't look at everything as a bad thing and starts, it's always not in overdrive all the time trying to get rid of things that is probably good for your body. I do agree with you that, the microbiome, we forget that we are hosting a huge number of microbes inside our body that are actually helping us. And the same context when people say, can you define good bacteria and bad bacteria, right? To me, it's not good and bad. It's about how much good, how much do you need? And if too much of anything is bad, no matter what. Even if you eat, too much of cake or anything, and too much of anything is bad. So that the whole concept of microbiome also, I think, there's a misunderstanding of what it means to host microbes inside your body.
Yeah, I think, and we've spoken about this, and I know, your colleague and my mentor, Dr. Tomoko Steen, is very passionate about this. There's a microbe called Akkermansia muciniphila. It's very trendy right now. If you have social media, you'll get constant ads for it. There's a company called Pendulum that produces a product. Halle Berry is their spokesperson, so it's a very sexy probiotic right now. And I became interested in it because there are studies showing that children with more akkermansia have lower rates of food allergies. So I'm all about trying to prevent and reverse food allergies. That became very interesting to me. It currently is having its darling moment in the spotlight because it's been shown to improve metabolic response. So another really popular topic right now, the GLP-1 agonists. Well, Akkermansia has been shown to actually produce metabolites that activate those receptors as well. So it's having a beneficial response to the metabolism, to sugar metabolism, and improving glycemic control. That sounds good too. However, the reason that Dr. Steen is passionate about sort of warning about it is there's a whole other body of research that shows that excessive amounts of akkermansia, or specifically akkermansia in the presence of too little dietary fiber, which of course is most American diets, actually is correlated and considered potentially causative with elevated risk of multiple sclerosis, so injury to the nervous system. Why would that be? Well, it turns out that the same way that, for example, I could go right now to my gym and deadlift 200 pounds. And then if I eat a healthy meal and get a good night's sleep, my body is going to generate muscle tissue. And tomorrow and a week from now, I'm going to be healthier, stronger, fitter, more muscular, better metabolic response, all good. However, if I go out to the garage, I deadlift 200 pounds, and then you and I go out drinking, and I stay up all night, and we party hard, and I don't sleep, and I don't recover, tomorrow I'm going to be inflamed, run down, and like immunocompromised. Well, but you could say, but in both of those scenarios, I exercised. Shouldn't the outcome always be healthy? No. The health comes in the response. Same thing with akkermansia. It eats the mucin lining in our intestines. Well, that's really great because old, yucky mucin lining, clear it out and rebuild a fresh one. But wait, if you don't have enough other friends and neighbors, different bacteria working alongside of you, and enough dietary fiber to feed those neighbors, you won't generate a new mucin lining. So extra akkermansia will eat away at the mucin, and then when new mucin does not regrow, you just have like a raw wire, it's like a live wire, a raw bare end. Obviously, that could lead long-term to neurological complications. So same bacteria, broadly speaking, it's considered probiotic, but it has pathogenic applications based on diet, lifestyle, environment. And I just think that that applies to everything, which is why the system is so important. Because even if you analyze someone and say, oh, they're prone to food allergies because they're lacking this keystone species of Akkermansia muciniphila, you give them that if you don't also consider their diet and whether or not they're resting. And if you don't follow up with them and make sure that the akkermansia is sort of participating in a holistic system of exchange where it's cleaning up but also regrowing this tissue, you may have actually created a worse problem than what you started with.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I that's why I keep saying that everyone has to be in tune with themselves. Even within a family of 4 or family of 5, each person is different. Even within my own family, I eat a lot of spice. My husband does not eat any spice. So if he's going to be eating spice all the time, he's going to be in the bathroom all the time. So it again, I think everyone has to be sensitive about their own body, be in tune with their own body, and figure out what's best and what works for them.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and I say this in a previous episode, that I really think that every single person these days, when they go to the doctor, needs to say to the doctor, so why aren't you recommending dietary changes to me? Why haven't you asked about what I'm eating? Because all I'm seeing in the headlines right now is that food is medicine and that the foods that I eat could be impacting all of my symptoms, all of my health outcomes. And yet you're not asking me about that. I really think we can sort of have citizen advocates shifting the trajectory of the way that medicine is practiced. But of course, having programs like yours also plays a huge and important role. When I was in this microbiome course that you're teaching, and pretty much everybody else in the course was part of the systems medicine program, and they were all future doctors and, future world changing physicians. And they're all thinking about the microbiome. And I was so excited because I'm thinking, wow, the doctors of the future are going to know to ask about the microbiome. What a world, what a major change. But of course, it's not just the microbiome, there's so many aspects. So I would love to hear a bit from you about where you see systems medicine going, perhaps like where is it really being practiced today? Where can people look for it? How can they advocate for it? And I also would love to know if you see any potential hurdles on the horizon for systems medicine. What might be a stumbling block in getting this systems approach out there to the masses?
Yeah. Thank you. I think, as I said, education and teaching was never in my equation of life career path. So I think that is the best thing that has ever happened in my life when I look back at the trajectory. So I think systems medicine. I think COVID. I must say that has actually really brought systems medicine, the understanding of systems medicine, to a household, in the sense that 4 people, 3 get COVID, 1 does not get COVID. They're all sharing the same utensils and all of those things. Vaccine, some have long COVID effects and some don't. And again, so people have actually witnessed and living through what is the cost for all of that is systems approaches, systems medicine approaches. So my goal and dream is for this to become a household name. Unfortunately, it is not, and we still have a long way to go. The reason is we talked about data some time ago. I think the thing is that we have lots of data right now, from clinical data. We have all of this biological data. We have lots of databases. We have all of those different tools and everything else. What we lack is, of course, we don't have enough people trained to understand how to mine this data and how can you bring it to the clinic. So Nature just published an article where the sequencing is going to be next door to every physician. So when a newborn baby comes, and if they have genetic defects and stuff, they can immediately sequence the baby within a few minutes and stuff, and have people to analyze. But the problem is we need enough people to analyze the data to figure out what is that the data is talking about. So that my goal is to train as many as young minds and brilliant minds, and create the next generation of different thinking physicians, different thinking biomedical scientists, different thinking in healthcare professions. So the program, as I said, was launched in 2016 and have graduated over 60 students. One thing about this program is not necessarily that it is only for going to medical school. The program also teaches lots of different components. So you can actually, it's a toolkit that you can take to any profession you want to. It's about data and how do you look at data. And it's becoming actually very important too. But a lot of my students are in medical school, and some of them are want to pursue PhD, and some of them are doing physician assistants, and some of them, one of my students just is going to graduate with a doctorate in nursing. So the door does open and all of that. But I think there is still lots of hurdles. So I'm training all of these students, but then there has to be a drastic change in how medicine is practiced by physicians, and as well as even medical schools for that matter. Medical schools need to change their curriculum to embrace the concepts of systems medicine right from the start. And until that happens, it's going to be very difficult for this to be successful, because there's only so much you can train, but then there has to be the receiving end also has to change, so that it's a seamless transition of spreading these principles in every clinic right now. Having said that, systems medicine is being practiced a lot, especially in cancers, for example. It's always precision. It's always personalized, figuring out which chemotherapeutic drug works for this patient and all of those things. So the principles are actually spreading. And I think the principles of systems medicine are more spreading in Europe And I want everyone to go look up the name Harald Schmidt, who's written a book on the end of medicine as we practice it. He's a physician, he's a clinician, he is actually a researcher. So he is spreading the concepts of systems medicine. So is a lot of other people. Of course, the way systems medicine is looked at is it's a network medicine. So everything is connected by a network. So the other synonym of systems medicine is network medicine. And a lot of people are practicing that as well. But the biggest hurdle I do see is that to spread the word around and the principles of systems medicine across, but also that there are lots of ethical issues that people are thinking about. Okay, if my genome is sequenced, am I is it privacy? If you're going to store it somewhere, can someone else look at my genome? So there are lots of ethical issues around it. In fact, we teach that in the curriculum as well. But also there are, again, insurances and stuff and pharmaceutical industry. I'm not sure that they're happy about that concepts, because how are you going to generate one drug for every person kind of thing? So there are hurdles from that point of view. But I think that slowly people are realizing this is the way forward. In fact, thanks to Dr. Ian Miles that you mentioned earlier, in his book, he has given a shout out to the program where these principles are going to be staying, and we just have to train a lot more people to look at this data and come up with the effects of that in the clinic.
So this past week was Rare Disease Week, and there's this sort of phrase that now is being used, this catchphrase. They say, rare diseases aren't rare.
Yeah.
Right? So even though one rare disease might be very rare, it's a very high number. It's like 1 in 20 people has a rare disease. So although the disease itself might be rare, and that might be a function of how we're naming it, perhaps we could actually cluster some of these and think of them as less rare. But anyway, I bring this up because I'm wondering, I identify as an outlier. When I think about average approaches to health, none of them really work for me and for my children. We have certain things about us, be they genetic or based on a long-term history of antibiotic overuse, dysbiosis, microbiome changes, dietary interventions. We've come to a place where, on average, of course, eating a simple whole foods-based diet is beneficial, but there are certain things, for example, like on average, eating an almond is good. However, if my daughter ate one, she would die from anaphylactic shock. So on average doesn't work for her specifically. And so I bring that up and mention the rare diseases because I'm wondering, how can the broader application of systems medicine help us as a society have more compassion for and understanding of outliers and the role that health and medical outliers play within the whole system? Because even though I am an outlier, and the average person maybe can eat gluten and feel totally fine, whatever, more and more I meet people who can't tolerate certain foods, can't tolerate certain environments, certain chemicals. And so there are more and more outliers, meaning to become an outlier is becoming more average. So how does the systems medicine approach help us understand outliers and the role that they play in the average approaches that we should be taking to health as a society?
Yeah, good you brought this rare disease concept. So I think, when you go to a physician, what they're actually treating is your symptoms. Sometimes the same disease may manifest in different phenotypes in different people. So it is just a lack of recognition of that, and connecting the dots is what is missing. And of course, it's not like every other person gets it. So that's why it was coined as rare. But now, as you say, rare is not rare anymore. There are lots, and we are actually discovering new diseases as well. And so immediately when they discover something new that they've not seen, they think it's rare. It's just that they've not seen enough people. To me, I don't agree with the concept of rare. Even if it is seen in one person, one patient, I still think it's worth investing resources to figure out that one person, because every life matters. So you brought up a very interesting point of how do we deal with, and how does systems medicine deal? How can we approach that from systems medicine perspective? So I had a student, and of course I have her permission to share her story. She got diagnosed with 3 rare. They call it rare diseases, a combination of 3 different autoimmune diseases, which are relatively rare. In fact, she still struggles to even find a physician across the nation to even go to for them to even manage her care. And she's become an educator now because no one knows what she has and all of that. But it's now that we have more technology and we have more tools that we are able to use. It's not rare anymore. They're able to figure things out and find more and more patients who probably they're connecting the dots right now. In her case, 3 autoimmune diseases, which are relatively rare. No one, and you can imagine how different systems are going to work in her case. And no one was able to, and in fact, she was misdiagnosed for a very long time. She had type 2 diabetes, but they thought it was type 1 because of her age, and then it was not type 2. So it was lots of different complications, and she became her own proponent, and she became her own advisor, figuring out what's going on with her and she came to the program just to learn how systems medicine can actually help her. And the way is that these 3 diseases are 3 different diseases names, but they may have an underlying component, genetics or mechanism or pathways that they all coincide together, but they're just manifesting in different organs, but they're all connected to each other. So we have actually started creating a comprehensive resource for all autoimmune diseases to figure out from a mechanistic perspective to come up with saying, wow, this is actually not rare. This is actually very closely related to type 2 diabetes, for example, or this is very closely related to ulcerative colitis, for example. So that I made it a mission in my life to actually create that to help people like her. So it's, again, systems because all of these are connected with different. They just have to have enough expertise and physicians to recognize all of these rarities to say that it's to go underlying to figure out what is going on. So it is just actually open up everything and see the connectivities inside. And so it may not be as rare as they think. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's very interesting. And especially when it comes to autoimmune disease and a lot of these sort of newer diseases, what is rare? Because right now, I think I know 5 people who have all been diagnosed in the last 5 years with these quote unquote rare autoimmune diseases. But how is it possible that I know 5 of them?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we all live together in the same, I don't know, nuclear infected house or something. Like, I know them from all different parts of my life. So although each of these women, they're all women, are experiencing this rare diagnosis in the context of their own lives and environment, I'm seeing that it's happening more and more and more. More people are being diagnosed. So as you just said, maybe rare is not really a thing. And it's just about how we're defining it and grouping it. And 50 years from now, we'll look back and say, oh, that was just a defect in this gene coupled with a lack of this microbe. They didn't have this metabolite and this gene was turned off. That's what caused what we thought were 10 different diseases. But in fact, it was one weird combination of gene expression and microbiome insufficiency. Now we know.
Yeah, but I also think that the medical school curriculum has to be revamped to come in lines with what is actually going on. And so that's my frustration that the curriculum, even one of my students decided not to pursue medical school after being in medical school, saying, well, this is not systems medicine and I don't want to learn the old genetics. I know that a lot of schools have revamped the curriculum. I'm not saying that they're not teaching the right things, but I'm just saying that they need to embrace the newer concepts and give their medical students an exposure to outside of the box thinking and also exposure to all these so-called rare disease networks. And, they need to have a rotation looking at things that they may not encounter on a regular basis. So we need to produce more physicians with those concepts so that they can recognize all of these symptoms and it may not be as rare as we think it may be.
Yeah. Something else that this kind of brings up for me is in our culture, there is this strange aversion in some corners to seeking out root causes because people are very afraid to lay blame, right? So in the past, really absurd things were said, like, 50 or, 75 years ago, people would say, like, autism is caused by, like, mothers being cold or something bizarre like that, right? So of course you don't want to be assigning blame like that. But for example, when I look at my daughter's food allergies, I totally put the blame, if you want to say it that way, on myself. She gestated in me, she nursed from me. I have a pretty clear understanding now of the mechanisms and the systems that were at play that would have caused her immune system to be skewed towards hyperreaction based on a series of things that were going on in my body and in her environment during that time period, right? That's not to self-flagellate or to unfairly or unnecessarily blame me, but if I'm looking for root causes, I want to understand the root. And for me, the root lies with me. So this is more of like a sort of personal opinion question, but how do you think we can move forward such that people are able and willing to seek out root causes without hearing it as blame or shame or, again, like self-flagellation? Like, how can we be willing to dig deep and go, oh, like, whatever, you ate blue 40 lake food coloring every day for 20 years, and it turns out that switches on or off a gene, whatever it is. How can we be more willing as a society and as medical practitioners to sort of examine how an individual's choices can impact their health without feeling like we're unfairly or cruelly blaming individuals for the outcomes of their choices?
Again, it boils down to education, and you're doing an outstanding job with your podcast, because that is one way of actually at least inspiring people to start thinking. I have lots of regrets of what I could have done to, for my daughter and all of those things. So we all have our own regrets. But at the end of the day, I think everyone has to understand that they have a significant role in contributing to society in terms of their own health and as well as their own mental well-being, and also provide that for children. And I always feel that it should start right from birth of the child, as well as the mother look back and be responsible. And of course, mental health is a big part of this. And if a child is growing in a household with the mental issues and stresses and stuff, they're going to be very reactive to different things. But then it's like, things happened a long time ago. And no, kids actually have memory, and their cells have memory. So what happened 15 years ago, they still remember when they are much older too, right? So I think it's education. And create health education, especially for communities, minority communities where they don't have access to things, and they don't know that eating, what's the advantage of eating good food and nutritious food and not burger and cheese every single day. It may work for some, but so I think it's education, and everyone has to have and take responsibility for understanding, taking a step back and understanding what are the different causes. I may say something out of anger to them, but then I never realize that they keep it in them and they bring it 10 years later and say, oh, you said such a thing. And that still stresses me out, and stress is not a good thing. So I think all of us have to be conscious. And I think education is a big part of it, and create, go into communities and talk about different things and all of those things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I love how you say that education is really so important. And obviously I agree. And I think that anyone who ends up in your classroom being educated and just learning to think about these issues in a different way is very fortunate and very lucky. And we're all very lucky that you accidentally stumbled into being an educator. I also think, just thinking about, again, how do systems medicine and public health actually share more than, people see them as being at odds? And I think what we keep coming back to in a lot of these systems medicine conversations is that diet plays a huge role, environmental exposures play a huge role. And that's where I think, okay, if you look at 100 patients who all have a rare disease, let's say, and it's a rare disease where a gene gets turned on maybe sometime midlife, and you look at those 100 patients, and all of them were eating strawberries that were heavily sprayed with a certain type of pesticide, and they also all lived near an airport where there was a lot of PFAS that was being put into the waterways, coming off of all the like flame retarding chemicals that are put into airplane like seats and everything. Okay, well now technically we're learning from a very zoomed in approach, these individuals with this rare disease. But what we're learning is that in every single case, quality of diet mattered and environmental toxins and exposures mattered. Well, we can take that information and pull it back out to public health and say, it doesn't matter what disease you're talking about, whether it's type 2 diabetes or a rare genetic mutation or even a rare cancer, access to quality foods should be at the top of the pyramid. What are we addressing first? And so the information is coming from a systems medicine approach, but it's immediately applicable to policy and public health. Same thing with environmental exposures. Again, pointing to Dr. Ian Miles' work, he's saying, okay, here are these children, they all have eczema. Well, here's this one chemical that we're finding in all of the environments of the children with the most severe eczema. That's a public health concern. You can't just turn to a 4-year-old and say, hey, little Johnny, your eczema would get so much better if you just didn't live so close to a roadway because all the chemicals coming from the exhaust. Little Johnny can't move. Little Johnny can't wear a mask every day to prevent himself from being exposed to the exhaust coming out of the tailpipe. Obviously, that has to be taken to a policy level, to a public health approach. So again, they sound like different worlds. Systems medicine, precision medicine, and public health. People hear those two terms and they think opposites, but they're not. Every single thing that we learn from systems medicine can be pulled out and applied to a public policy and public health lens.
So I think it's interesting that you brought Dr. Miles' work. I think everyone should go read his book, and his what he has actually demonstrated is he has actually merged the two by his work, and he's found almost a cure for eczema. But how did he do it? Just taking into account, little things and collected data on those things. And actually, he's merged systems medicine approaches into public health and has come up with a cure for that. I think that model is amazing and fascinating, and I think we all should adapt that kind of model and awareness of what we are doing and what the environment is all about. Of course, we cannot, I know everyone cannot afford to buy organic foods, for example. So we are going to be exposing and taking in things that we shouldn't, but how it's going to affect each one is going to be different. So, but at least to be cautious and at least reflect on what everyone is doing on a day-to-day basis and how you can actually connect all of these dots. And when you go into the physician's office, ask them all these questions. This is my diet. What do you suggest I change based on my condition right now? Or what do you think? I think that's going to take a long time because the physicians have to be aware and embrace. They don't have the time. They want to see 10 patients in 1 hour. So they really don't have the time to talk to you other than just, talking to you about your symptoms and giving you a medication. So,
Right.
My heart goes out to all the physicians. I like them. I work with them all the time. But I think there has to be a collective realization and change, drastic changes in the way we approach things.
Yeah, this is where I could totally easily spin out into a conversation about the healthcare system and different levels of care and supportive care networks. So maybe it's not all about the MD. Maybe every doctor's office has a team of nutritionists and dietitians so that if you have those questions and your primary care can't answer them, you get funneled into, a network of care, right? Network medicine, systems medicine. The system needs to be built out. And not everyone has to be an MD. Not everyone has to be sort of diagnosing and treating in that way or knowing how to perform surgeries. Of course, we need those people as well. But it's very important to think about how can we build out this system, starting at the bottom, our nurses, our PAs, even phlebotomists, right? Having enough people in place. And like you said, having enough people trained in the systems medicine data analysis, because you're all well and good to produce this data, but if no one knows how to analyze it, if no one can actually run the reports and go, here's what we learned from these 10,000 bodies of evidence of different people's metabolic profiles, these patterns showed up in this population, someone has to actually be able to look at the data and do that analysis. So all of these roles are very important, and they all work together. Speaking of which, I want to quickly bring in something else that you and I have talked about, which is how obviously systems medicine is very modern, and you and I are both big fans of, the technology and information needed to perform systems medicine. However, we do live in a world that has many cultures and many ancient wisdom traditions when it comes to healing. And some of those traditions are actually quite systems focused. So, for example, like I have an acupuncturist. She's definitely thinking about the systems of my body and how they all interconnect. And you and I have spoken about Ayurveda and how that approach to health is very systems focused. So, could you briefly speak about how a systems medicine approach and an approach like Ayurvedic medicine can actually be complementary?
Yeah, I just gave a talk over the weekend to some Indian students, and the same question came about. So when you talk to an Ayurvedic specialist, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Because we do precision medicine and personalized medicine for more than 5,000 years. We came up with the modality to treat, and it's working. So what is this new thing about systems medicine? So that's when I started thinking about it. And actually, they're right. So I think systems medicine and Ayurvedic medicine are complementary to each other. And earlier on, when I said we have to stratify population into different groups, I think we can easily adapt and learn the principles of Ayurveda. Something similar. I'm not sure if we can just adapt to what is there. Maybe things have to change there as well. But so there are Ayurveda stratifies people based on, kapha, and there are like 4 different prakritis. And so each person, depending on different, their temper and all of those things, they're classified into different things. And they say, okay, if you belong to this particular group, then you have to eat these kinds of foods go well with you and all of those things. But then there's a science behind it. Each and every one of those 4 categories also have specific genetic predispositions. So if you sequence them, which was surprising to me, I read some articles where they have done genotyping. And so there are, for example, people who belong to this kapha category actually have more HLA genes expressed. So which is something very new to me. And I'm not, I don't have knowledge in this area, but it's fascinating to me that at the end of the day, phenotype and genotype actually comes together. So which means we can easily design experimentation to combine the two and take good things from both and come up with a modality that actually should work across different populations. So now I'm excited with this new revelation and going back and, reading what is already been done and seeing how we can adapt and complement that with systems medicine. And I'm just very excited about that. And I think it can actually work. They're complementary to each other.
Yeah. It's like Ayurveda says dosha and we say phenotype, right?
That's right.
Like
And
just different words for kind of the same thing.
And the whole concept that there is genetic differences among and how they're classified was something new to me. So which means we have so much of sequencing data of patients. So just to give them, classify them based on Ayurvedic principles and see whether they match with each other, then we'll have a system in place, which is again combining systems medicine, but again, it's precision medicine or personalized to individual person.
Right.
And of course, they also combine nutrition to it. They combine yoga and meditation and lots of other holistic modalities. And I know that you brought up acupuncture, and I'm reading about it right now. So each culture has their own wealth and goldmine of information that we just have to combine them to figure out to make it one system. So it's, the traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture points, and they believe in what are called meridians that connect different things. They actually have a meridian that connects the brain and the gut, which we talk about the gut-brain axis. So I am, as much as I'm a scientist, I'm very spiritual as well, and I believe in these healing modalities. I practice yoga myself and meditate myself, so I do know how they can actually help. So there is science to all of this. It's not, voodoo things, but there is science to all of this, and everything can be combined at the genetic levels with the individual people. Actually, there are different healing modalities that actually work as well, and music.
Yeah.
Music is also another thing that can help as well in all of these equations.
Yeah, there's actually a paper that I read recently that I believe the title is "The Immune System Hears Noise" or something like that. And it was a paper where they studied how the immune system responded to either music or white noise or like street noises. And they actually showed this kind of inflammatory response to these kind of like, actually both the white noise and the street noise, but the music produced this like beautiful, healthy immune response. So, one paper in a sea of many, but there's definitely something to consider, again, through a population health perspective. If you're living in an urban setting, there's always lights on, there's always noises. How is that impacting your immune system? We already know that people living in certain neighborhoods of DC have much higher rates of asthma, let's say. Well, some of that is exposures to pests, some of it is dietary exposures, some of it is chronic stress, some of it is maybe perhaps lead paint, something along those lines. But then, of course, there's this additional angle of the noises that they're being exposed to and how that is chronically weighing on the body. So all of these things are connected, which is one of my favorite phrases. It's all connected. It's so difficult to separate one system from the other. I also want to say, I recently said this to a friend because she was having a health condition and going to doctors who just kind of had no idea what she was talking about. But then she turned to PubMed. And suddenly she found hundreds of papers that were related to what she was experiencing. And that was also my experience as a food allergy mom. You go to the doctor and they're like, oh, no, we have no idea what happens with food allergies. No one knows. Good luck. Here's an EpiPen. Don't die. You go into PubMed, and for the last 20 years, there have been hundreds of papers, sometimes thousands, coming out every single year on food allergies, searching for the root cause, trying to understand it through different lenses. And to me, that gave me so much more hope to know that even though this has not reached the bedside, it is in science. So one of my goals actually as a science communicator, podcaster, and just doing this work out in the world is to shorten the distance between the literature and the bedside, because patients who are struggling on the front lines with these illnesses deserve to know that there are curious researchers doing work on these illnesses right now. Whether or not your primary care physician or the person in the ER has any understanding of it, they're bleary-eyed, they've been trying to survive medical school, they don't have time to be in the literature constantly, but there is a whole other army of scientists doing this work and this research, and it's important to kind of connect those dots and give patients that hope and that understanding that there is this inquisitive, curious, real research happening at the same time, and they're not alone.
That's right. And that's how I found millions of papers already published on Ayurveda and precision medicine. One paper was from 2011. And I'm like, oh, I missed that whole literature. So I did go to PubMed. And now I'm reading through lots of papers. And so it is, again, it's overwhelming because there's so much of information out there. Most people don't know how to weave through it and get the right information. So I think that's why education helps. And I feel we have the responsibility to transfer knowledge to people. And I think education plays a big role.
Yeah. Something that I read on the Georgetown website, I was, reading up about you to make sure I had all the right questions prepared. And you said something like, if you positively impact the life of one student, then it was all worth it. So first of all, you've definitely done that. Well done. Over and over. I'm sure it's been at least, 60 students, but I can speak personally that you have positively impacted mine. But I also want to just highlight that sort of concept and how important that is and sort of the quote unquote ripple effect is when it comes to these changes. Because looking back on my own health trajectory, I had a lot of doctors as a kid who just said, oh, she's overweight, her tummy hurts, whatever. She has chronic ear infections, give her antibiotics, whatever. And then, as luck would have it, I had one gastroenterologist who looked at my life and said, every single morning at 9 a.m. you have a horrible stomach ache, and every single morning at 8 a.m. you have a bowl of cereal with milk. Maybe you should try cutting out the milk, right? He saw the system. He didn't just see the symptom. He looked 2 steps behind the symptom and asked, well, what's happening first? that one comment from that one doctor who just took a chance in that moment, maybe try cutting out milk. Oh, it totally changed my life because not only did it stop that symptom and thus change my experience of being a young woman, it also totally changed my body composition and thus changed how I think about health. If changing one food could completely change how I experienced my life,
Oh,
well, what
yeah.
else could I do, right? And so for anyone listening to this who is in any kind of a position, educator, healthcare provider, health coach, wellness educator, any kind of communicator, even just a friend, I think it's so important for all of us that we realize that those single moments, those single lives that we touch, it's not singular.
Mhm.
It really ripples out. And you never know when that one bit of information, that one curiosity, that one digging deep with someone could be the thing that totally shifts the course of their life. So I very much admire the work that you're doing because I see it as doing just that, as getting curious, as inspiring curiosity and creating a whole new generation of doctors and practitioners who are going to do this kind of work. But I also just want to thank you for doing that work yourself because it's impacted me and it's just so impactful in general.
Thank you so much for your kind words and actually opportunity to share my work. Um, I take it very personally, and if I've impacted even one student or someone and pointed them in the right direction, I feel like I've done my part. And if everyone does that, we'll have millions impacted and millions inspired to go and change this world.
So I want to make sure that I ask all the things that I wanted to ask, but also not keep you here for 1,000 years because it could possibly take that long if I really asked everything I wanted to ask. So I want to wrap with a couple quick questions. One of the courses in your systems medicine curriculum is this microbiome course, which is how you and I met. And of course, I find the microbiome very interesting and exciting. You've been teaching about it for a few years now. You're very much in the literature. If you were to just pick a couple things that you think, high level, the average citizen could really benefit from understanding when it comes to the microbiome, what do you think they are? What do you think the average person should know about the role that the microbiome is playing in their health or potentially their disease?
So, microbiome is a very new concept now, but now I think everybody is familiar with that. I created this course about 5 years ago, not knowing what microbiome was. The way I create courses is because I want to learn. I was at one seminar where they used the term microbiome. I'm like, that's curious. What is microbiome? So that's how I started. 5 years into it, I'm still teaching that course. So I think everyone should understand that microbiome. We have all of these bugs in us, but that are not actually bad. They are actually good. It's not only they're good, but they actually help you function properly. For example, we don't make vitamin C ourselves, so that's either coming from your diet or it's actually produced by the microbiome. The same thing with folates and vitamin Bs. There are lots of vitamin Bs, vitamin E. They're all produced by the microbiome, and that's where we get those vitamins from that actually impact our functions of many metabolic pathways in our body. So if there is a bacteria that's not working in you, which means it's not producing vitamin B, for example, and vitamin B12 especially is very, very important for so many things now. And so you may be experiencing symptoms. For example, vitamin B12 can even cause stroke. It happened to one of my family members, and they figured out it was vitamin B12 deficiency. So you cannot underestimate the importance of these vitamins in your body and where it's actually coming from. And these are produced by the microbiota. So which means that you're going to go to the doctor, oh my God, stroke is a big thing. And so you go, you get hospitalized, and they give you also all of these drugs, but yet forgetting the fact that you're not actually taking care of your root cause, which means you have to make sure that your microbiome is healthy. So which means you have to eat the right nutrition that's able to stimulate your microbiome to produce those vitamins for you so that you can function. So I think we forget the fact that we are dependent on the microbiome and the microbiome is dependent on us. So we kind of help each other out. So I think that, and now we have enough amount of data out there to show the role of microbiota in cancer, in practically every single disease. Some of these organisms go up, some of them go down. So we have to figure out how to replenish our body, and this is all up to us. It's not up to the doctor. It's up to us to figure out what foods you can eat in order to actually replenish your body back to its shape. For example, everyone knows that if you are on a course of antibiotics, we know that they kill a lot of these bacteria, and that's why the doctors tell you eat lots of yogurt or probiotics, because it takes more than 6 months to replenish your gut flora back after a course of antibiotics. That's why we say try to stay away from it. But then you have to eat all the good foods too, so that your body is back in shape. We think body is back in shape if you go to the gym and exercise. No, it's actually eating the right things so that your bacteria is happy and is beginning to bring your body back to normal.
Yes, I'm going to use this moment to interject my own agenda, which is that I think as a culture, we need to take a step back and redo our analysis of the RDA for nutrients, because a lot of those numbers were generated 50 plus years ago, and the use of antibiotics commonly was not at a population level used the way that it is now. So the average person 50 plus years ago would have, in theory, had a much more robust microbiome producing a lot of these nutrients on board. And so doctors or scientists who are analyzing, okay, how much of vitamin B12 does a person have to exogenously consume in order to meet the threshold of sufficiency? Well, whatever the number was 50 years ago, that may have been in the context of someone who had a huge colony of bacteria that were churning away inside the body, producing the B12. So the exogenous consumption was much reduced. Whereas now, if someone's gut has been effectively sterilized or close to sterilized by repeated antibiotic consumption, hello, it's me. It happened to me. That person may, at least for a time while they're healing, need a much higher dose of that vitamin, but we don't really have a way of addressing that. I mean, that's some of what functional medicine does is, looking at the panels and trying to balance it out. But even in those contexts, they're not always thinking about, is it because there's a missing microbe who should be producing this to me? And is there a cofactor that's missing that the microbe might have actually been producing as well? Perhaps there's a microbe that not only produces B12, but some other cofactor that helps my body utilize it. Whereas when I take a synthetic B12, I'm not actually able to put it into action the same way that I might. So my hope is that as a society, we can be willing to have a more complicated conversation and just say, hey, listen, like what worked 50 years ago, it might not be the same case now. People are heavier on average, they're consuming more calories on average, and yet they have more disease on average, and their guts are more sterile on average. So how can we take that knowledge and reassess and reprogram our dietary recommendations to address these insufficiencies or deficiencies that can creep up even in, a wealthy population? We always think, oh, the US, we have so much food here, we're so rich, nobody could have a deficiency. Guess what? A lot of people have deficiencies, and they really can creep up on you when you least expect it, because even if you're eating a healthy diet, there might just be one microbe missing or a genetic mutation that causes somebody to not produce. Like you said, you need coenzymes to actually use statins effectively. Well, maybe we could reduce a lot of drug negative interactions if we just understood what those cofactors are and the role that diet and microbes are playing.
Absolutely. And also, I think we are living in a world full of stress, and a lot of stress we put on ourselves. And I feel that everyone has to find one modality that is going to make them happy, be it listening to music or going to the gym or practicing yoga or just talking to a friend. So everyone has to reflect everywhere and remove stresses from their life. The reason I say it, I just hosted my uncle who's 89 years old. But when you look at him, he'll look like he's 70 years old or even 65 years old. He travels. He learned scuba diving when he was 75, and he just told me that for his birthday, he wants to go and scuba dive, get his dive done. And I look at his life, and the only thing that's missing from his life is stress. And so that's what he's still able to dive at 89, scuba dive. He's independent. and very sharp mind, no memory loss. He does everything on his own. He still drives. And so that was actually a wake-up call for me this weekend when I looked at him. So remove all the stresses, do good to everyone else, and no need to stress. So that's a big part of being happy as well.
Absolutely. And I think something for 20 years, I've been trying to put good microbes into my gut, and I've thought a lot about the gut-brain connection. But it was only this year that I started to think about the brain-gut connection. And I've actually begun to meditate and think about telling my gut, it's safe, it's okay, you can live with me. Because I've been putting good microbes in. Who knows if they colonize? Who knows if they take? And even though the gut is obviously communicating with the brain, it is a bi-directional relationship. And if my brain has for many years been saying to the gut, well, nobody's there, so whatever, we're just used to it being like that, perhaps that's preventing a healthy and beneficial colonization. So I've now been doing the top-down communication as well. It's okay. It's safe. You can stick around. Feel free to set up a colony, unpack your bags. I would love for you to live here. So I say that to say, yes, like the stress is that top-down function where anything that we're perceiving around us that's feeling like turmoil and stress, and it can actually cause disease and actually send negative messages into our systems. So I love that. And kudos to your uncle. My grandpa is 98 and similar. I think they would get along. He can't scuba dive, I don't think, but he does a lot, and he definitely stays young by staying, actually in his words, curious. What keeps him young is
Yes.
staying curious. And
That's
that's what I hear with your uncle.
That's right.
And frankly, that's what I see with you, is a curiosity. In sixth grade, you knew you wanted to be a scientist, and you just have kept on doing science, staying curious, always pivoting and always changing. So I think that that is very admirable, and I think it just speaks to all the amazing work that you're doing out in the world. So if somebody wants to find more about you, or perhaps wants to come work with you or learn about the work that you're doing, where should they turn? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So my information, of course, is at Georgetown. And if they are interested in the program, they can go to systems.medicine Georgetown. Georgetown. If you just Google Systems Medicine Georgetown, I'm sure they'll get to my page, the program's page. Of course, if they want to email me, they can email me as in Sam, V as in Victor, number 67 at georgetown.edu. I welcome any comments or any questions.
Amazing. And I will also put links to all of that in the show notes below. Well, on that note, Sona, I am so grateful that you came and spoke with me today. I think that hopefully we introduced a lot of people to this concept of systems medicine, but also explained how important it is to public health and just how much these systems can learn from each other and share. I'm so grateful to the work that you're doing in the world. So grateful that I landed in your classroom. I believe the universe plopped me there herself. And I look forward to continuing our conversation in the future. And hopefully many, many people will benefit from this conversation as well.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Marian, and you are one of the most outstanding students, and of course, outstanding human being. You have a lot to contribute to this world, and with your knowledge about the human body, your own personal experience, and how you deliver. I have to learn that from you. How you deliver all of this is just amazing, and it's my honor to be part of this. I consider this a blessing.
Thank you once again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. For more information on my guest, Dr. Sona Vasudevan, please see the links in the show notes, including links to her systems medicine program at Georgetown University School of Medicine and her email if you want to reach out with any questions or comments. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Informed Solutions Consulting. Thank you so much once again for listening, and we will see you next time.